Sometimes it feels as if your heart is standing in front of a closed door, knocking softly, hoping for a sign that someone is listening on the other side. You've waited for words that never came, for confessions that remained locked behind the barricade of his pride. And in that waiting, in those long moments where silence stretched out like an endless hallway, you started to wonder if you were ever truly seen, if your feelings had ever really mattered. It's a peculiar ache, to love someone who hides behind their own walls, to sense their longing without hearing it spoken, to feel their presence in the quiet spaces yet be denied the simple dignity of acknowledgement. There is a place where the pride of a man collides with the quiet strength of a woman. It's a hidden crossroads, where neither wants to appear too vulnerable, where both pretend they are unaffected, while their hearts whisper truths they are too afraid to say out loud. Perhaps you've been in that place, sitting with your own doubts, asking yourself if silence means indifference, or if it's just a language of fear that neither of you learn to translate. Because sometimes, what looks like coldness is only a trembling soul trying to protect itself from being hurt again. Sometimes, what you call rejection is only a man's clumsy attempt to feel safe behind the armor he built long before he met you. Louise Hay often said, "Others only reflect the love we have inside ourselves." Maybe that is why his silence feels like a mirror you didn't ask to look into. You wanted to be affirmed, to be cherished in words that would soothe the restless questions in your chest. You wanted clarity. You deserved clarity. And yet, there you were, staring into the void where his voice should have been, measuring your worth by the absence of a sentence he couldn't say. But if you pause for a moment, really pause, you might notice something softer beneath the pride, something almost tender. The quiet is not always empty. Sometimes it holds all the things he couldn't bear to admit, even to himself. Brené Brown reminds us that vulnerability is not winning or losing. It is the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. And isn't that the hardest part of loving someone whose pride is louder than their heart? To keep showing up for yourself, even when they won't show up for you. To keep believing you are worthy, even when their silence tries to convince you otherwise. Because deep down, you have always known that no confession from him could ever define who you are. You are not the sum of the words he never spoke. You are the quiet knowing that you were real. Your love was real, and your longing was never foolish. His silence is a locked door, but your self-worth is the key that doesn't need to turn it. You can stand there with your hand resting against the cold wood, feeling everything you feel, and still choose to walk away whole. Because the truth is, even if he never finds the courage to speak, you are allowed to move forward with your head lifted and your heart intact. You are allowed to honor the part of you that still hopes while refusing to wait for an answer that may never come. And in that choice, in that quiet liberation, you become your own sanctuary. You become the love you were always waiting to hear. You know that heaviness in your chest when you wonder if he ever thinks about you at all. When you replay every moment, every glance, every small kindness, searching for proof that you were not just a passing thought. The unspoken weight can feel like a stone you carry alone, even on the brightest days. It's the ache of wanting to be remembered, to be important enough that your memory lingers in his mind the way he lingers in yours. And though no words come to reassure you, somewhere in the quiet, you sense that he revisits those memories too, but his ego keeps them sealed away like fragile treasures he doesn't dare to touch. It's a strange form of longing, the kind that doesn't fade with time, but grows more haunting because it's never released. You see, the mind is a place where stories replay themselves over and over, and even if his lips never shape the words, his thoughts are still drawn to you in moments he can't predict. Like a letter never sent, his feelings gather dust in the corners of his heart. They are there, even if he pretends they're not. They rise to the surface when he's alone, when the noise of the world quiets down, and nothing stands between him and the memory of what you shared. But pride is a fierce guard. It tells him that admitting he misses you would make him small, would cost him a power he clings to more tightly than he ever held you. And so, he says nothing. He keeps the door closed, believing it makes him safe, believing it makes him strong. But you, standing outside that door, you feel every echo of what he refuses to name. You feel the contradiction, that he wants to reach out, but he can't bear the risk of being seen without his armor. You sense the invisible pull that tugs at both of you when a song comes on the radio, when the season changes, when a familiar scent drifts through the air, even when you try to convince yourself it doesn't matter, that you've moved on. A part of you still listens for footsteps in the hallway of his silence. But what if his pride is not proof of your unworthiness? What if it's only his own fear disguised as indifference? It's easier, after all, to pretend that nothing remains than to face the vulnerability of admitting that something always will. And so he stays hidden behind that locked door, replaying moments he will never confess, holding on to the illusion of control. But you, with your open heart, have always known the truth. His silence does not erase the connection. It only reveals the limits of his courage. There is something almost tender in realizing this, because when you see his silence for what it is, a defense, a hesitation, a longing too big to name, you can stop measuring your worth by what he fails to say. You can stop waiting for an apology that may never arrive. You can start understanding that your own heart is brave enough to feel it all and still keep loving, not because you are weak, but because you are stronger than you ever believed. There is a quiet kind of prison that few talk about, a place where a man's pride builds walls so high he can barely see over them. This is the cage of the ego, the belief that needing someone, missing someone, is a flaw too dangerous to reveal. When you think of him, you might imagine he feels nothing at all. But the truth is, he feels everything and shows nothing, caught in the tension between his desire to reach for you and his fear of losing the image he has built to protect himself. The ego tells him that longing is weakness, that vulnerability is surrender, and so he stays silent, hoping you will believe he has forgotten, when in reality, the memory of you is the only thing that feels alive when everything else has gone numb. You may have wondered why someone who once looked at you with so much softness can now pretend you never mattered. It is a cruel illusion, this performance of indifference. Underneath it, there is often an unspoken regret, an ache that he has no words for. Louise Hay once said, "I am willing to release the need to prove I am right." But for him, admitting how much he still cares would mean admitting that he was wrong to let you go. It would mean laying down his pride and confessing that his heart never truly moved on, no matter how carefully he tries to convince himself otherwise. It is easier to pretend you were just another chapter, easier to hide behind silence than to risk the shame of saying, "I miss you. I still think about you." Because in his mind, speaking those words would strip away the armor he has worn for so long. It would expose the tender, trembling part of him that is terrified you no longer feel the same, and so he clings to his pride, as if it were the last defense against his own emptiness. But when the night comes, and the noise falls away, he is alone with the truth. The thoughts of you return like a tide he cannot stop, washing over the story he tells the world. Maybe you have felt that tide too, the pull of unfinished sentences and unsaid goodbyes. You have sensed that behind his coldness is not absence, but a restless spirit that still looks for you in quiet moments. He fears that if he speaks, he will lose something essential, his sense of control, his illusion of strength. So he waits in silence, convinced it is safer to keep you wondering than to reveal how much he still cares. And while he waits, you are left with a choice: to keep seeking validation in the place where his ego reigns, or to remember that your worth was never dependent on his courage to speak. There is something almost invisible that lingers between two people who once shared their hearts, something no amount of silence can fully erase. Even when the calls stop and the messages fade, there remains an unseen cord that tugs gently at you when you least expect it. You could be standing in line at the grocery store or folding laundry on a quiet afternoon, and suddenly, a memory slips in uninvited. The way he laughed, the way his hand rested on your back as if you belonged there. It's as if your souls made a quiet agreement to keep remembering each other, no matter how many walls were built in the aftermath. This chord is not always a sign that you are meant to return to him. Sometimes it is simply the echo of a bond that was real, even if it could not survive. It is the proof that you loved with an open heart, that you showed up with your whole self, and that nothing about your sincerity was wasted. And though he may pretend that the connection is severed, there are nights when he feels the same pull, an ache he tries to dismiss as nostalgia, but knows deep down is something more persistent, like a thread of memory that still tugs at both of you, even when you try to convince yourself that you have let go completely. It can be tempting to idealize this invisible bond, to believe it means you are unfinished, destined to find your way back to each other. But perhaps the lesson is gentler and more liberating than that. Perhaps the cord is not there to bind you in longing, but to remind you of your own capacity to love, to show you how deeply you are able to feel, and how bravely you once offered your heart. It can feel confusing, this tension between remembering and releasing, between the sweetness of what was and the necessity of moving forward. Yet in this space of remembering without clinging, there is a quiet kind of healing that asks nothing of him, and everything of your own acceptance. And if you can sit with this invisible connection, without demanding that it become something again, you may discover a new freedom. The freedom to honor what was without surrendering your peace to what will never be. The freedom to feel the pull and still choose not to follow it. To say, softly and without bitterness, that some ties are not meant to be cut, only to be respected from a distance. And in that respect, you reclaim a part of yourself that was never his to define. There are moments when the regret he tries so hard to bury begins to seep through the cracks in his composure. You might never witness it firsthand, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Regret has a way of curling itself around the heart, tightening when the world grows quiet and the distractions fade. He may never admit it to anyone, not even himself, but sometimes he remembers all the ways he could have stayed, all the words he could have spoken, all the tenderness he withheld out of fear or stubbornness. And in those moments, the silence he clings to feels less like power and more like a wound. He doesn't know how to heal. You've likely heard stories of a man who reached out years later, his voice trembling as he finally confessed, "I thought about you every day." Perhaps you imagine that hearing those words would bring relief, would prove that you were always worth remembering. But the truth is often more complicated, because when someone keeps their regret hidden for so long, it can never quite undo the loneliness their silence created. You were left to wonder while he was left to pretend, and though you shared the same history, you carried the questions alone. Sometimes the shame of admitting that he still cares is more than he can bear. It requires him to look honestly at himself, to face the truth that he walked away from something real, something that mattered. And for many, that is a truth too heavy to hold. So he builds a life around distractions, convincing himself he made the right choice, while somewhere in the quiet, he feels the hollow ache of knowing he did not. His regret is not an indictment of your worth, but a reflection of his own unspoken sorrow. If you have ever wondered whether his silence was final, whether it meant he never looked back, know that the absence of words is not the absence of feeling. Often, it is the opposite. His quiet is thick with memories, weighted with the fear of what it would mean to say them out loud. And though you may never hear the confession you imagined, there is still a kind of closure available to you. The understanding that his regret belongs to him, not to you. It is his to carry, his to reckon with. You have already carried enough. There comes a moment when you realize that his silence is not simply about you, not a verdict on your worth, or a measure of how lovable you were. It is, in so many ways, a mirror, reflecting his own fear of rejection, his own hope that you might be the one to break the stalemate. It can feel almost impossible to believe this when your heart has been left waiting for so long. But if you look closely, you might see that beneath all his defenses, he still wonders if you remember him as tenderly as he remembers you. He holds back because stepping forward would mean risking the humiliation of finding out you have moved on without him. Perhaps you've sensed this in small, almost imperceptible ways. The lingering glance if you ever crossed paths again. The hesitation in his voice when your name comes up. The way he disappears altogether rather than risk an honest conversation. And even if you have tried to convince yourself that it doesn't matter anymore, that you are past caring, there is still that small ache that wonders why he could never simply say the truth that you mattered, the truth that he still carries you, somewhere in the quiet chambers of his memory. But here is something no one tells you about the mirror of worth. It is always more accurate when you stand in front of it alone, when you stop searching his eyes for proof that you were enough, and start seeing your reflection without the distortion of his fear. The woman you were with him was already complete, already deserving. His inability to honor that had nothing to do with your value, and everything to do with his limitations. When the ache rises, and you feel the old temptation to reach out, to offer one more chance for him to meet you in honesty, try breathing into that space instead. Breathe in the truth that you no longer need his acknowledgement to feel whole. Breathe out the belief that love requires validation to be real. Louise Hay once said, I approve of myself. Such simple words, yet they hold the power to free you from the prison of waiting. You can approve of your own heart, your own tenderness, your own bravery, without asking for permission or recognition. And maybe that is what healing finally looks like. Standing in front of the mirror and seeing yourself as you are, not as his silence tried to define you. Seeing that your story is not incomplete just because he never found the courage to speak. Your story is already enough. There is an almost unbearable tension inside a man who feels so much, but says so little. You might never witness the moments when his heart rebels against the story he tells himself, when the memory of you slips past his carefully constructed defenses and reminds him of the tenderness he tried to forget. In these moments, he is no longer the man who seemed so certain, so untouchable. He becomes someone else, a man divided between the prison of his pride and the freedom of his truth. This is the quiet battle you cannot see, the silent war between who he pretends to be and what his heart still longs for. You may have tried to imagine what it would be like if he simply allowed himself to be honest, if he stepped forward and admitted that he still thinks of you when the night grows long and the world falls away. But for him, vulnerability is a risk too great to bear. It would mean stripping away the armor and standing exposed in all the ways he has spent his life avoiding. It would mean showing you that his indifference was only ever a disguise, a way to protect the most fragile parts of himself from rejection. And so he chooses silence, believing that as long as nothing is spoken, nothing can be lost. But in that choice, he loses something far more precious, the chance to live with an open heart. It takes a certain kind of courage to meet your own truth without turning away. It takes an even greater courage to share that truth with someone else. Love, real love, can only exist in that space where fear is met with honesty, where pride is set aside so that something softer, something braver, can finally be revealed. You have always been willing to stand in that space, to offer your heart without guarantees. And perhaps that is why his silence feels so heavy, because you know how much lighter everything could have been if he had chosen to join you there. If you never hear his truth, will you still honor yours? Will you still stand in the light of your own honesty and let it warm you, even if he remains in the shadows? Because no matter how much you wished for his confession, you are not obligated to wait for it. Your worth does not depend on whether he ever finds the courage to meet you in that place. It is enough that you were willing. It is enough that you loved without reservation. And it is more than enough that you can walk away knowing you did not betray yourself to earn what he could not give. There is an almost seductive promise in waiting, the idea that if you hold your breath long enough, if you remain patient enough, he will eventually find the courage to say what your heart has been craving to hear. It's a quiet illusion, this hope that one day his confession will arrive like a long-awaited letter, proving that you mattered, proving that you were never forgotten. And yet, while you wait, something inside you begins to wither. Your own voice grows softer. Your own sense of worth becomes entangled with his ability to validate it. This is the subtle trap that waiting sets, the belief that your story is unfinished until he returns to complete it. You might have noticed how easy it is to replay every memory, searching for hidden meanings in the things he did not say, to wonder if perhaps he was always on the edge of telling you everything, if you were only ever one conversation away from being chosen. But love cannot thrive in the space of almosts. It cannot breathe when your entire heart is suspended in the hope that someone else will finally see its beauty. You have always been enough, even in the moments when he could not find the strength to say it out loud. The truth is, you do not need his recognition to honor the reality of what you shared. It was real, because you felt it. It was important, because it shaped you. And it is over not because you were unworthy, but because he could not rise to meet the part of you that was willing to be honest. There is no confession that can erase the ache of having waited for something that never came. But there is a quiet dignity in deciding you will not wait any longer. If you have ever wondered what it might feel like to release the need for closure, it begins here, in the gentle acceptance that your heart deserves more than the endless anticipation of words that may never arrive. It begins in the quiet moment when you realize you can write your own ending, one that does not depend on his courage to validate your worth. And though it may feel strange at first, to no longer measure yourself by his silence, it is also the beginning of your freedom. There is a quiet kind of strength in the way you have learned to hold your own silence, in the way you have chosen not to reach for him when every part of you still remembers the softness of his voice. You may have questioned whether your stillness would be misunderstood, whether your decision to stay silent would be seen as indifference. But sometimes, not responding is not about rejection at all. It is about maturity. It is about the choice to honor your own peace more than you crave the temporary comfort of his attention. You have given so much of yourself to spaces where your tenderness was never fully met. You have offered understanding where there was avoidance, compassion where there was pride, and forgiveness where there was only a closed door. There comes a moment when you realize that your silence is not an empty space, but a garden growing quietly without an audience. It is the place where your healing takes root, where you learn that your value does not depend on whether he ever finds the courage to come back. Louise Hay spoke words that echo in these moments. I am at peace with my own feelings. Peace does not always look like resolution. Sometimes it looks like sitting with unanswered questions and trusting that they do not diminish who you are. It looks like choosing to be your own witness, to validate your own experience, without needing someone else to confirm it was real. When you stop needing his recognition to feel whole, you create a space inside yourself that no silence can touch. It can feel unfamiliar at first, this self-contained peace. You may still feel the occasional ache, the flicker of longing when memories resurface. But over time, you will notice that the ache softens, the waiting dissolves, and what remains is something steadier than any confession could ever offer, the quiet certainty that you can love yourself enough to let go. There is a soft kind of liberation in understanding that you no longer need to hear the words you once longed for. You may have spent so much time imagining what it would feel like if he finally admitted that you mattered, that he still thought of you when the nights were quiet and the distractions ran out. But the truth is, even if he never says it, even if his pride keeps the door closed forever, you already know. You know because you felt it. You know because your intuition has always been wiser than his hesitation. It is a strange paradox, realizing that the closure you sought was never really in his hands. It was always waiting for you in the quiet spaces of your own heart. Those moments when you looked in the mirror and felt the ache of missing him. Those nights when you traced the edges of old memories and wished things had ended differently. They were not signs of weakness. They were reminders of how deeply you loved, of how much courage it takes to feel so much without turning away. When you stand before your reflection and whisper, I trust my intuition. I am enough. Something shifts. The part of you that once waited for his confession begins to soften its grip. The longing that once felt like a wound becomes something closer to understanding. You start to see that his silence does not have the power to rewrite your story. It never did. Your love was never dependent on whether he was brave enough to speak it back to you. It was complete the moment you allowed yourself to feel it fully. Louise Hay taught that the love we seek in others is often the love we are being called to give ourselves. To stand in front of your own truth and say, I am worthy, I am whole, I am here, is the most honest declaration you will ever make. You are not waiting for anyone to deliver the validation you have always carried inside you. You are not unfinished just because someone else lacked the courage to meet you where you stood. And if there is any lasting lesson in all of this, it is that self-love is the only voice that will never lie to you. It is the only voice that will never leave. When you can hear it clearly, when you can trust it fully, no silence can ever make you feel unworthy again. There is a gentle power in remembering that his pride, no matter how loud or convincing, has never been a measure of your worth. You have spent so many hours wondering if you were too much or not enough, questioning whether his silence meant that you were forgettable or unlovable. But the truth is simpler, though it may not feel easier. His inability to speak does not make your love smaller. It only shows you the limits of what he was able to receive. When you look back on everything you shared, it can feel almost surreal that it ended with so many words unspoken. You may still find yourself replaying the last moments, the last conversations, trying to understand how something that once felt so alive could be reduced to this quiet distance. But the distance does not erase the truth. You were brave enough to love. You were strong enough to hope. And you are wise enough now to know that you can leave the door closed without abandoning yourself. Louise Hay's words linger like a balm over all these questions. I release the need to be approved by others. Those words are not about pretending you never cared. They are about choosing to care for yourself more than you care for someone else's validation. They are about honoring your own heart's courage, about recognizing that the love you offered was not wasted just because he could not meet it with equal honesty. There is no shame in having wanted his voice to meet yours in the middle of the silence. There is no weakness in having wished he would choose the truth over the illusion of pride. But there is also no freedom in waiting any longer. Freedom begins when you understand that your story does not require his confession to be complete. Your healing is not contingent upon his apology. Your peace is not something he has the power to give or withhold. Brené Brown reminds us that owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing we'll ever do. This is what it means to own your story, to stand in the fullness of what you felt without shame, to grieve what was lost without bitterness, to release what was never truly yours to carry. And as you do, you may notice a quiet kind of relief rising in you, the sense that you are finally free to walk forward without looking back. Your worth is the quiet lighthouse that never needed his ship to come home. It was always there, steady and luminous, waiting for you to see it for yourself. If this moment resonates with you, if you feel a soft recognition blooming in your chest, you are exactly where you are meant to be. You are enough, just as you are. You always have been. If you feel called to continue this journey of healing and self-discovery, you are invited to subscribe to this channel so you never miss another conversation like this. And if your heart is ready for the next step, there is a video waiting on the screen now, a gentle companion to guide you even further into your own strength. You deserve every moment of peace that comes from loving yourself first,